everyone, and very welcome to our session this evening. We're very excited to have you here. I know it's a Thursday evening, and thank you for taking the time out to be with us. We really appreciate it. I don't think you'll regret it. We have a wonderful panel of speakers here for you this evening. And this event is a collaboration between the Asia School of Business and the 30% Club Malaysia. And the title of our webinar this evening is No Mud, No Lotus, right? So finding order in all that work-life chaos that we have around us. So tonight we'd like to focus on the reality of COVID-19's impact on our nation, our society, our work, and of course our family lives, right? It's a topic that resonates with most of us, I'm sure. It's been a difficult 2 years, with the world facing all this unprecedented change, and Malaysia is no exception. And today we see our nation transitioning into a post-COVID world with a lot more new realities to face, right? So and these realities have transformed us in so many ways, many of which have brought out the best in us, but I think also I've seen the worst to some extent, right? But I, for one, would personally like to believe that we are a resilient nation, and that even throughout all the challenges, we've managed to pull through with our humanity intact, at least, right? Hence the no mud, no lotus metaphor that we're referring to tonight. But of course, there's still much work to do as we reimagine this new future for ourselves, and that's what we hope to look at tonight. In terms of our healthcare infrastructure, maybe the ways we educate ourselves. Working from home has changed the way we viewed remote work. Not to mention how reliant we've become on technology. And of course, I think one thing that's also cropped up is how we're managing social media responsibly, right? We've seen a lot of social media usage being positive as well as negative. And on top of that, I think one of the key things we've seen is a shift in family dynamics, particularly as there's now so much blending between our work and family life. And that's a lot of what our topic's going to be tonight, and our panel will speak about that as well. We've seen traditional gender roles shift. And we don't want to just, when we talked with to the 30% Club, we said that we didn't want to just focus on women empowerment topics, as we usually do, but we want instead to get really real about some of the key issues that women face as part of a larger unit of the family, right? And so tonight, I would like to thank Tan Sri Jemilah, of course, and our esteemed panel for joining us to talk about the experiences in pulling through this pandemic, as well as how they intend to forge ahead. But before we proceed to our speakers, let me first welcome Ms. Nadia Tan, CHRO of SP Setia and Talent Pipeline Lead for the 30% Club Malaysia, who'd like to share a few words with us.
Assalamualaikum, and thank you, Michelle. It's really good to be here. I know it's been a long day for many of us, but this is really the right time to discuss this. I just want to say a few words about 30% Club, and I think many of you would have known and heard of 30% Club. It was established in the UK in 2010, and of course, Malaysia being part of the international chapters. I would say we've been doing really well, because compared to some of our counterparts, as we speak, I think the latest data we have is 25% of our top 100 companies have got 30% women rep at board level, and that's the primary premise of 30% Club. That's still a long way to go, but I would say we've done much better than the other countries. And just to share some numbers, for example, in the UK, they're ahead, of course, 33%, Japan is 10.5%, Hong Kong 30%, Australia 30%, but our more of the same category as us, Brazil 9.4%, Southern Africa 19.9%. So I think relatively speaking, we're doing quite well, but there's still much to do. But I think as what Michelle has said early on, as much as the spirit of 30% is to place 30% at board level being women talent, I think the whole idea is that it does start from the funnel of talent pool that we have coming up. And me leading the talent pillar talent pipeline pillar, for the last few years, we've noticed that there are many factors that actually influence the success of women. As much as we speak about how women should be empowered, enabled, and also given the leeway of being present, we can't run away from the fact that there are factors, for example, family support, superior support, leadership, and so on. And that's why we want to talk beyond just 30% board membership, but really look at how can we grow that talent filling up the funnel for the future. And interestingly, we are privileged and honored to have Tan Sri Jemilah, and she's a very busy person, but we're so lucky to have her today, because what we want to cover, as Michelle said today, is the impact of pandemic. I mean, we've seen how COVID has huge influence on our lives, and today every organizations are talking about ESG. Now, ESG covers more than just the governance side of it, but what do we do and how do we see corporate roles or even communities responsibility towards what's happening around us. So today it's not the normal 30% club with just about women empowerment, but we have Tan Sri Jemilah to share with us her experience. Obviously, someone who's been around the world, I would say, and proud for her to be a Malaysian who positioned Malaysia elsewhere with her contribution elsewhere in the world, such as United Nations and Red Cross and so on. So she will share with us some of her on-ground stories and how her being a female talent, we're really talking about real stories, real challenges, let's get real about what's really happening. And the fact that we also have some power couples after this, because I always say this, as much as we say women can be successful and on their own merit, but that's not completely true, because we need our spouses, we need our parents, we need our friends, we need our support system to really help us get there. So no one is really successful. Since Azran is here, I must say he was my superior before, and he has been a real champion for women, right? So we need more men, we need more CEOs, we need more leaders who are there to support women as we play so many roles, multi roles, and sometimes I think in Asia, I hate to underestimate the cultural element and society pressure sometimes, and I'm sure Tan Sri Jemilah will share a little bit about that, and how sometimes we shortchange ourselves. So let's have a good time this evening, and thank you at ASB for this collaboration with 30%. We're really excited about how we can together work on not just a corporate level, but a national agenda. Thank you, Michelle. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And, completely agree with you. We're all playing so many multiple roles. And in particular, our next speaker, Tan Sri Jemilah, has played so many different roles in her lives, and she's always been inspiring to me. First time I heard her speak was 7 years ago at one of our conventions. And, tonight we're excited to have her. So just for all of you who don't know her very well yet, I'm sure most of you do, just a little bit of a background. Tan Sri Jemilah is a medical professional with more than 2 decades experience in managing crises in health, disasters, and conflict settings, right? She made me cry last time when she told us the story of what happened to her in Iraq, right? She's currently professor and executive director of the newly established Sunway Center for Planetary Health in Malaysia, and was also formerly the special advisor to our PM on public health. She's also a member of the government of Malaysia's Economic Action Council and Climate Action Council. So she's also been in the Red Cross as Undersecretary General for Partnerships, as Nadia mentioned, and also Chief of World Humanitarian Summit Secretariat at the United Nations. Wow, right? And of course, she's the founder of Mercy Malaysia, something that's very close to all our hearts. She's also held many, talking about 30% Club, board positions in NGOs, and INGOs, and has been the recipient of numerous national and international awards for her work. And today we're so excited to have her here and to hear the real stories on the ground and to hear her thoughts about how our country has transitioned, right? And some of the key learnings that we could have possibly taken away as a nation from this COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to hand it over to you, Tasri Jemilah. Very welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, Nadia. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I know there are many incredible women and men in the audience, and for making time, in this traffic jams and everything that you have to endure. So I hope that, this will be useful. The title of the event is one that resonates deeply with me. I'm sure all of us here today, no mud, no lotus. If anyone is like me and enjoys the occasional K-drama, this was certainly a prominent conversation in the series King's Affection, which is now on Netflix. And, coming back to the topic, COVID-19 has been said to be the great equalizer. So many lives lost, livelihoods damaged, and suffering that often had to be left unaddressed or buried deep in the midst of all that is going on. We also know that while the pandemic is a brutal storm, we don't all share the same boat. So I have Kari, my assistant, trying to share some slides as well to make you more entertained during this talk. So I hope they're coming up as well. And there is a poem by Damon Barr that perfectly captures this. While some enjoyed quarantine for a moment of reflection, others were desperate to just survive day to day. Those more marginalized have been disproportionately impacted. 8 out of 10 retrenched Malaysians had to hunt for jobs and possibly are still hunting for jobs, while having to mentally cope with the sheer overwhelming brunt of the pandemic. Many of them come from already low-wage industries with minimal social protection. Women all over the world have had to face the even more intensified double burden of care work and office work at home after decades of normalized and gendered household chores. A recent piece of research by my former colleagues at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent highlighted that in this crisis, it is always women who have to pay the higher price of managing and surviving the crisis. In 31 out of the 38 countries studied, all showed disproportionate impacts of the pandemic to women, from losing more jobs compared to men, while also having to take on the bulk of unpaid labor at home. This is not even including the everyday anxieties that women have to face. In some places that I've worked, just walking on the street feels unsafe, worrying about harassment and sexual abuse. Luckily, we are not so bad here in Malaysia. So since the start of the pandemic in Malaysia, suicide rates were estimated to be 5 times higher among women than men, and this is a huge surprise. And just imagine if you are a mother and losing your home, your job during the pandemic and having to live with your children on the streets. And of course, that's very difficult in a pandemic. And not to mention the increased rates of domestic violence during lockdowns. Our own local hotlines were buzzing with over 57% increase in calls for help. Now, migrants and refugees are even further down the line of disadvantage. So we are living in a period of uncertainty, and navigating that is taxing on anyone's mental health. And let's talk about that, mental health. So pre-pandemic, many of us could have accomplished so much in a day, juggling between work and social time. Nowadays, even a brief social interaction could leave us exhausted. Certainly it leaves me exhausted. And after being in and out of lockdowns, it's almost like we have planted a newfound fear in our minds for many people. Will there be another lockdown? Will I have time to catch up with all my family and friends beforehand? Could this be the last time that I meet my parents, the last time we get to celebrate festivities together? And it doesn't help when we see the number of cases rising globally, in our cases, taking a long time to come down. So we have to acknowledge the situation that we are in now is extremely difficult. And like the poem that I shared earlier, we are in a terribly brutal storm. And for some, this brings discomfort. For others, real pain. For us to weather through this, I would propose we need three things. Firstly, self-awareness. That yes, we are living in troubled times. Be kinder to ourselves. The ways that we work now are different, both mentally and physically. Days in the office are becoming more rare, replaced by the more familiar setting of home. For the less privileged, these may be even uncomfortable settings. How do we cope coming to terms that we are living through a pandemic, but also having to jump on Zoom calls every day, or in my case, a few times a day, and then manage our house and family at the same time? So boundaries are blurred. Toxic positivity cannot hold. So you must give space for this confusion. Secondly is courage. Courage to face these new challenges and to know that we are all in this together. And thirdly, to build social mechanisms that support each other. Fortunately, our nation isn't lacking in this spirit to support, but we lack the organizational efforts to transform this into actual systems. We all know the impacts of COVID-19 to society. We are still living it, the fatigue, the confusion, the loneliness, and let's be honest, these are the suffering of the more privileged among us. While on the other hand, many have had to endure compromises to their own physical health and well-being, sometimes figuring out how to get food on the table for the family. We also know that much of what we had to endure could be avoidable, or at least mitigated. Strong social protection, a culture that recognizes the importance of mental health, and systems that are just, inclusive, sustainable, and built to prioritize people over profits. COVID-19 has forced us to brutally confront the reality that if we had seen a crisis such as this coming, why then has the world not rallied for more investments and collaborative efforts? Why are we repeatedly surprised by such crises that we ourselves had predicted and should have been more prepared for? The answers lie in that we have allowed ourselves to be complacent. We have allowed echo chambers to rule over collaborations. We have taken all this mud, but we have not planted the seeds. Beyond the statistics that we often hear are real human stories. Stories of struggle, pain, and grief, but also stories of strength, resilience, and support. There are many lessons to be learned from this experience as a nation, but perhaps I can summarize it to another three. Firstly, we can come together. It's easy to see the bad in humanity when our screens are painted with pictures of conflict and terror, our ears tuned into reports of pain and suffering all over the world. But in my over 2 decades working through different crises, what strikes me are the huge opportunities that comes with each crisis. COVID-19 has ripped apart the band-aid on the inequalities that exist. The acknowledgement of all these inequalities was what led to an outpouring of compassion and a renewed sense of sisterhood, brotherhood, and I dare say even nationhood. We saw many on the ground social movements, the average person helping the neighbor and going beyond, innovative campaigns led by small-time businesses and students who are themselves struggling financially, just so that they could help the frontliners, the elderly, and the disadvantaged. We prove to ourselves that we can come together and do great things. We must remember that it is our behaviors and our sense of community responsibility that have lifted us out of the peak impacts of the pandemic. Secondly, hope is much, much stronger than fear. There's an exciting photography project that I'm now working on with a couple of friends to document small pockets of hope throughout the pandemic. Amidst all the fear surrounding us, the fear of the virus, the fear of getting vaccinated, worst of all, of humanity, there is so much more hope. And I have personally witnessed this. We had gone to vaccination programs in remote areas. The unfit me had to climb on top of, take terrible trips to the tops of hills and through rocky roads and in homes that stood dark without electricity, but lit bright with hope. There I saw hope in its tiniest, oft unnoticed forms, in the smile of a child, reimagining a world of adventure from an empty old wheelbarrow, in the faces of nurses who are undoubtedly beyond exhausted from the long trips, but still so excitedly chatting away with each other, and the soft embrace of a child and an elderly parent. So a few of us working on this project with a young woman photographer helping us, have compiled a lot of these photos, and I've given you some sneak peeks, but perhaps we can even have the photo and poetry exhibition at ASB or Sasana Kijang, together with the 30% Club. And this leads me to my final point. You lose nothing by being prepared, but you stand to lose all when not. We hear a lot about recovering from this pandemic, but how can we thrive? Many countries are already talking and working on disease X, a deadlier pandemic that is only a matter of when, not if. Last year itself, I was already engaged by Singapore to discuss this as they start to prepare. In fact, the cost of preventing future pandemics over the next decade is only 2% of the COVID-19 bill, and this is by 2020 calculations. So with what we've experienced this year, there is no doubt that bill is much higher. I'm a big advocate for systems thinking, and that is precisely what was badly needed to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. We had tremendous charity coming from and to all sorts of directions, but COVID-19 has laid bare the gaps in our systems, not only health. The respective and necessarily complementary roles of the public and private sectors were ill-defined, overlapped, or simply just disconnected. Investments in healthcare focus more on medical treatments while overlooking primary health, disease prevention, and other public health concerns. Civil society and grassroots organizations and communities were not actively engaged in the early part to be part of the solution. Thinking around global health and planetary health in particular was absent, and yet we clearly see even today, no one is safe until everyone is safe. The shift from pandemic to endemic is all about a shift in our psychology, in our behaviors. Psychologically, we must first accept that an endemic situation means we are unlikely to see a situation where there is an early end to COVID-19. The virus is and will remain among us for some time. And it's also time to face that reality of how our individual and collective actions impacted the environment and what the environment has now thrown back at us as a consequence. And it's often said that our economic model puts the health and well-being of future generations at risk. However, this statement is only half true. We are already compromising the health and well-being of present generations. The environmental and climate crisis is now undeniable, and we have already seen some of the risks it poses to our health. Many people are unaware 7 million people die because of pollution or have died. And after all, COVID-19 didn't come out of thin air. Our destructive actions like deforestation, wildlife trafficking, fueled by plain greed, are at least in part what led us here to a world where zoonotic diseases or outbreaks become more common, our climate less stable, and the gaps between our communities' well-being widened. Our pre-COVID normal was what led us here in the first place. So to thrive post-pandemic means to recognize the gaps in our systems and in our thinking, and to reorient our behaviors, to fit a value system that looks to a future that is sustainable for all generations. This means promoting fairer economies, creating stronger social protection mechanisms, demanding justice, transparency, and action from our leaders. And most importantly, starting small and building a culture that feels responsible and cares for the people and planet, because we know that they are so closely interlinked. Our country's vaccination program was a great symbol of this very hope that I have been speaking about. It looked to the future in that it was a green, sustainable program. I think many of you are not aware of this. Clinical waste was reduced as much as possible, and then it's carbon tracked for offset. A bigger point of pride was that it was guided by the principle of leaving no one behind. The poor, disabled, elderly, and most importantly, migrants and refugees in the country. They all got their vaccine shot, and perhaps quite literally, their rightful shot towards protecting their own health. Still, our glasses cannot be purely rose-tinted. In more than 2 decades of work, I've seen crisis bringing out the best in people, but I've also seen it presenting the worst in humanity. While we worked to leave no one behind in our vaccination program, we also had to continuously fight to achieve this, both offline and online, against vaccine hesitancy, against plain hatred and discrimination. Remember the crackdowns against migrant workers, the remarks against them getting vaccinated, the videos we have seen of migrants coming for vaccination being so obviously discriminated against and shunned and humiliated. You would think that it should never even be a debate for people to be treated kindly, to be allowed health. The lotuses that we champion and think fondly of now, the Kita Jaga Kita movement, support streaming in through a myriad of initiatives, organizations, and individuals fully mobilizing themselves to support others, have come out from that thick, dirty mud. Kita Jaga Kita was birthed from public frustration. The white flag movement was a literal symbol for surrender from a perceived lack of social protection. We had youth having to climb up trees just to get connected for online classes. So what does this say of our supposedly advanced society? While we tout of our developmental achievements in the international sphere, we fail to realize that sometimes it's only a superficial and narrowed vision of development. There is certainly, in my opinion, no development in a society that has to rely on charity simply to survive. After all, charity in many cases are merely a response to injustice or inequity. So the future begins with our actions today. And this is why I have now put immense effort to establish the Sunway Center for Planetary Health to do exactly what I have talked about today, preventing the next pandemic, tackling the climate emergency, promoting fairer economies, making sure that people and our planet are safe, healthy, and thriving. But for us to have this vision of the future, we must include all of you listening to me, but we must most importantly include young people. They are the true agents of change, and they hold within them so much hope. They're creative, innovative, resilient beyond what we perceive. Have you seen how young teens have mobilized community action much faster than some governments worldwide, simply through quirky memes? And in all my previous work in international organizations, we always ensured that we had young people, youth committees that would challenge the board and management. And how many of our boards do that? In fact, I'm happy that our center in Sunway is the first university in the world to reorient itself and making this important investment towards planetary health, which is a mandatory subject for every student, and therefore really investing in the future. So going to office itself nowadays, when I do go, is quite fun seeing students on campus, and you can almost feel, that the air is so filled with hope. And it's a true indication that if we want to redesign our future, we must best include the people who will be living through it. Let us remind ourselves that the pandemic is certainly far from over, but we have all the tools to prevent and prepare for the next one. and to get out of this, inshallah. We are tired, sure, but lest we forget, we are the ones truly capable of lifting ourselves out of this pandemic and into a future that we can all be proud of. At least half of the solutions are with us in our behaviors and attitudes. 80% of our total population is fully vaccinated, including 82% of our adolescents. Now, this is an amazing number. The number of cases will remain in flux for a while, but in this transitional phase, it means it is now ever more important for us to stay disciplined with wearing our masks, to get that booster shot once we are eligible, to make the decision ourselves of avoiding crowded places or not, and not just rely on the government to tell us what to do. If we fail, it is not the government to be squarely blamed, but ourselves too. And the next time you see someone unmasked in a closed room, someone not observing safe distancing, and your neighborhood or friend refusing a vaccine, will you be willing to call this out? So our journey in life will continue to be confronted with muddy patches, but we hold those lotus seeds. It is up to us to decide if we want to plant them rather than wait to be told. By then, it may already be too late. This planet will survive. The question is, will we? Now, for those who know me well, you will know that I am an absolute Star Wars fan. And I think of myself sometimes as a Jedi. And these are two quotes I lifted from the movies that remind us how we must strive to success, right? It's about, hope is in a rebellion, right? We need to stand up for what we believe, to be better for humanity. But in doing so, to always protect each other. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the force we must embrace. And may it be with all of us tonight and as we move forward. So I've left quite a bit of time for Q&A because I was told by our dear friends from ASB and 30% Club that we want to keep this as interactive as possible. So I'm really looking forward to getting your questions, having a dialogue with all of you. And thank you again for giving me this huge opportunity to share at least my opinions, my thoughts, and my call to action to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri Jemilah. Once again, you've managed to move us, to make us question reality, and also inspire us with hope at the same time, right? And before we move on to questions, there's just one thing I thought I'd highlight that really resonated with me, and that was hope is so much stronger than fear, right? And as a coach and psychotherapist and counselor, I spend a lot of time helping people to just reframe their fears, and rewrite the stories in their heads, right? To create that hope for the better future that they can build for themselves. And so much of the times, what's happening with us now is, like you said, right? We're suffering from what researchers and scientists and doctors call anticipatory grief, right? Because we're anticipating the worst all the time. We live in this world where there's so much uncertainty, and as you said, is it the last time I'll see my parents? Is this the last time I'll get to go to the places I love, or do the things that I want to do? And a lot of us are still languishing in many ways. I mean, like you said, we're still moving out. We haven't exactly transitioned out of it yet. We're still going through the motions of getting through this pandemic, and so we're languishing, right? We're not we, as much as we hope to thrive, a lot of us are still on that state of languishing where we're not depressed. We've moved a lot past that stage, but we're also not thriving yet, right? And our mental health is still a concern, right? There's still a lot of issues around it. So before we move on to the other questions from the audience, which I'm sure they have tons of questions for you, I have my own personal question for you. May I ask you, right? Can you tell us how you remain a flowering lotus, right? How you managed to thrive throughout all the mud that's been thrown at us in the last 1.5 years? I want to hear, your personal story. We've heard your wonderful, inspiring ideas, but how have you thrived on a day-to-day basis?
I had a lot of mud slung at me, right? But it's I think like everyone else and every human being, there are days when I get really, really hurt and really sad. And but I don't give up hope, right? Because and I said this the first time we met to Michelle in my speech, that we're all put on earth for a purpose, and we have to find that purpose, right? And for me, when I took on this role in the past, the only concern for me was my fellow citizens, because I had managed pandemics before, and I had managed many crises before, and what could I do to bring that experience to the country. But it wasn't easy at all, right? For but I say, you have to open your eyes wide to look at these pockets of hope, because they keep you going. They really do. To know that the most important thing is you're sincere, you try your best, yeah, and get on with it. But I'm not a Superman or Superwoman, right? We all bleed and we all hurt, but also ground yourself that you may not achieve that 100%, but 50% is better than zero, right? And surround yourself with people who will also keep you on the straight and narrow, and continue motivating you. There are many times I wanted to give up, right? But it's you think of the journey as a test, and that you need to get to that at some point in that journey to some degree of success. So it's about self-motivating, finding the right people, but also knowing that our time on earth is so finite, so do the best that we can.
Well, thank you so much. Absolutely, I think, right, that support system, which is so very key, and that's why we want to hear about how the families have changed, right? Family dynamics have changed, how women cannot thrive on your own, right? And they absolutely need that support system around them as well. And I think the other thing that really struck me as well was gratitude, right? So as we look for those pockets of hope, they also I think inspire us to have gratitude in our lives. When we look at, especially when we go out and we see so much anguish and so much suffering, it allows us to also find so much gratitude in what we have at home, right? In our own homes, with our own families, with the people that we love and trust, right? So thank you so much for that. And I'd love to open the floor now for questions to the audience. You can just raise your hands and just direct your questions to Tan Sri, or you could also write it in the chat box, and we can also read that out for you. So opening the floor. Any questions?
While everyone's thinking, maybe Tan Sri, I'll put my question. um, I'm curious because like someone like you who's also who's work around the world, and in my work in 30% Club, and also as a leader working in local and MNCs companies, and sometimes I feel is it a myth, or generally local talents do feel like there's the cultural elements that sometimes limit their talent, especially so women. So what I like to hear is probably from your perspective, because you've worked elsewhere, New York, Switzerland, and also most recently here. Do you really think that our culture has a strong influence, or is it just individuals that's self-limiting themselves?
I think if I come, let me tell you that I worked in the international scene for a long time, right? And in international organizations, the same feelings that women have in Malaysia are also very similar to what other people feel. The self-doubt, sometimes looking at all the barriers to breaking that glass ceiling rather than the opportunities or finding the way through those barriers. And unfortunately, the culture of mansplaining and all the things that some men do to women, and I won't say all, exists even in large international organizations. I've been harassed, I've been bullied, I've been mansplained to death, right? So, but and often we just have to be, be tough, right? And put on our little shield and just plow through. But I think here in Malaysia, culture is a very important thing. And let me be very honest with you. I mean, my husband has been told, he's sitting next to me now, so he's looking at me. He has been told many times by people that, why don't you take another wife, right? Because I'm so useless as a woman, traveling all the time, working abroad, and all that. So I usually say, well, why didn't you, right? But the thing is, and I said this many times before, if you can't marry well, don't marry at all. I'm just fortunate to be married to somebody who acknowledges my strengths, my talents, my capabilities, and who tells me that the things I do, he can't do, and why would he stop me from doing something that he feels is also important? Betul tak? So he said yes. So I think it's unfortunate, but I must say, and this is my perception and my biased perception, maybe, having lived abroad for a long time and coming back, I'm beginning to see a very stark patriarchy is quite stark in Malaysia, and it's quite worrying and quite telling, and I'm not sure why. I didn't feel it like that growing up as much, and in my early part of my career, as I see it now. Especially in government, working in government, looking at how interactions are between men and women, I think it's really quite patronizing and patriarchal. So, we can only get out of this if men help us, right? Men do the right thing. And men acknowledge that, women are half the sky, and that it's so much more fun when women participate, and the ideas and the energy we bring is just different. And not better or worse, but just different, and that together is so complementary to have, those that diversity of views, and and I just feel that, I must say, majority of the people who have sponsored and helped me are men. And let's also call a spade a spade. Women can sometimes be our worst enemies. I have seen how women would deliberately find ways to belittle other women who are in positions of strength or power. So I think, I would never say men are just bad. No, I think it's individuals. It's also how, in which company you're in, right? Sometimes men are okay, and then when they're with other men, they like have to show they macho skit, but so I think, how do we break that? This is the big question mark. How do we break this? And I think, we need to have men to champion this. So I think when I was at the UN, we had this fantastic thing called He for She. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it was a campaign launched by UN Women. And the champions of He for She were the men. So we had this, I think we should do it here. They had this little lapel pin, and it just says, hashtag He for She, and men speaking up about the importance of, women's influence and voices. But if anything, COVID-19 has shown us that it's possible to work from home, right? And I remember when I was working at the Red Cross in Geneva, and I said, can we please allow women to work from home? Because in Switzerland, if you have lived there before, on Wednesdays, all children in primary school and nursery don't go to school. So for some reason, they only go to school for 4 days. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday break, Thursday, Friday. So if you're a young mother working, it's very difficult to plan your days, right? So what happens is that men have also got to take responsibility and take the day off. In my organization, we even allowed them to bring their kids, right? But if you have 5 kids, you can't run around the office. So I think that, that option to work from home. Now, that in itself is not a solution, because when you're working from home, you are supposed to work and then you get distracted by the children, and then the gender norms come in, right? The women has to prepare the meals, la, la, la. But, of course, in Europe and all that is much more, the men, shares the burden. But these are the realities that we face. COVID-19 provided an opportunity for us to relook at human resource capabilities, right? I mean, human resource ways to work. So the future of work will be different. But, if that's the case, then, how do we change our culture other than through education from young? So I used to tease my close Indian friends, right? They would talk about equality and all that. And I would say to them, the women, if your son was getting married, would you still demand dowry? So if you as a woman don't even want to embrace that very basic cultural thing, right? That no, we don't need to, we can abolish this, we're all equal, right? How do you want to that big cultural shift that needs to happen? At the same time, if we don't build in from school this notion of respect for, and respecting gender and diversity, right? I always say gender diversity because it's also about, gender is very broad. It's not just about men and women. And also, how is our education system built? If you look at the Nordic countries, for example, women, girls are taught woodwork and carpentry and plumbing and all that, and men are taught how to sew and do, what we usually ascribe as feminine things. So breaking down that gender sort of stereotyping requires it to be happening from very, very young, right? So I think education plays a very, very important role, and role modeling as well.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri. What I really picked up from that as well is that sometimes we are our own worst enemies, women, right? And it reminds me, of that little saying that was going around, the meme that says, be the woman who fixes another woman's crown without telling the world that it was crooked, right? Yeah. And I always remind myself that as well, especially at times when you're in positions where another person tries to tear you down, right? So very important. And I the other thing I suppose that really resonated with a lot of us was the fact that when you say the young people are our future, right? It's exactly in helping them to develop that mindset right from young already, right? So like what Lily said here, what Nadia said, and what Supeng, Supeng said as well, right? We have boys, we have sons who are growing up, and we need to teach them already, not to support this patriarchal sort of culture, and to grow them from a young age, like you said, to respect women, right? So I have 3 boys, and I've always tried to bring them up that way, and not even to think about it as just respect, right? But to not even consider if they're male or female difference, but to consider them as equal, right? So that gender doesn't even come into play in that sense, because if we're equal, in many ways, of course, bringing in our different strengths and weaknesses, then we don't even have to think of one as being less, and therefore we need to then elevate them to that point of respect, because there's already respect by default, right? So thank you for that. And I think we have another question here from Crystal. She says she's really inspired by what you said about hope is a rebellion. How do you remind yourself to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, unpopular, and not the social norm?
Again, this is about, I think it's something you just have to remind yourself. I always say that, you're put on earth for a purpose, right? And our time is finite. It's not forever. I must say, for me, I would think it's also about my upbringing. I talk about this a lot. I come from mixed parentage, where, respect, and being able to navigate, different cross-cultural issues. I went to a school that nurtured girls to be leaders, right? And to speak up, speak the truth at all times. I went to a Catholic missionary school my entire schooling life. So, and you have a feisty nun, teaching you to speak up all the time, who we would leave school, cancel classes in school just to watch Men from La Mancha or something like that. I mean, that was the kind of upbringing I had, right? So I think for me, it's a natural thing. So of course, people don't like it. A lot of people don't like me because I will say it, whether you like it or not, right? I will say what you see is what you get, because you can't be anything but yourself. How can you be anything else, right? You have to be at least, you have to at least go to bed thinking that you've said what you really mean, right? And do what you really say. So I think that again comes from upbringing and education and the nurturing, and and a really a conscience that pricks you if you don't say the right things or do the right things. So that especially on rights, right? I feel very strongly about human rights, and and therefore it's just the right thing to do.
Thank you. And I think, as a leader, I heard you speak before, and they said, what's one of the most important traits of the leader, or the most important? And you said being authentic, right? And, and I think that's exactly, what you're saying now. Just be really, really true to yourself, have that purpose, and that will just drive you through, have those values that you hold on to be able to move forward, even when the world, is throwing mud at you. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. We have can we just do one more question before we
Sure.
move to our panel?
Sure.
We have one from Supeng here. He says, how do you empower women in the pandemic, especially when it comes to health-seeking behaviors and resilience coping mechanisms?
This is particularly hard when you're actually in a lockdown, right? But let's put it this way. I have learned so much through Zoom calls compared to the times when we weren't doing Zoom calls, right? So our technology has been this fantastic enabler for women. And the fact that we can connect on screens and talk and all that. And I think, we have to use and leverage technology to do that. And number two is, I think, it's about networking. It's about building that strong network of people who will support you on this area, because whether we like it or not, the future is in distributed networks, right? It's about having broad networks and connecting with all of them. And I think technology enables us to do that. Now, I say this in the context of a privileged woman who has air conditioning on right now and has Wi-Fi, right? But how then do we address the real women who actually need to be empowered, right? And whose role is that? So, I would think traditionally we will feel that, women's agencies, government should play a role. But honestly, I think more and more now, change only happens when it's from outside. Change will happen when ordinary people like us decide to support organizations or do it ourselves, to actually go down to the ground and empathize and really see for yourself what's going on. And I dare say, if any of you follow me to some of the places I've seen, you will all want to do something to help women, because it's real. The challenges are real, but the strength is incredible. So it's inspiring, it's humbling, but we all need to do this. So I think, whether it's the institutions or whether it's civil society organizations, whether it's a private sector, and I think if you look at the role of private sector, it has been incredible. If you look at the pandemic itself, private sector has really risen to help and support and so on and so forth, despite the fact that they've been affected. And if you look at, if I can give an analogy of COP26, right, or the climate crisis, when governments have failed, the private sector stepped in and said, okay, we'll try and get our act together. When the Paris Agreement was being formulated and the US government, stepped out, right? I won't tell you who was the leader there, but 50 mayors said, okay, we are going to sign on the Paris Agreement because we want to take that leadership. So I think we will move towards, as I mentioned, a distributed network, but also decentralization of power. And power is not about just, you being in government. Power is also about the ability to give power to others. To me, that's real power, right? When you are so confident that you can give power away and know that you're still strong. So I think, we need to rethink, the structure of society so that we can then find those avenues to strengthen, those who need, some support.
Thank you so much for that, and if there's anything that has come out from COVID, I believe that it's us just learning to be human beings again, and when we start to rethink this structure of society, the one thing that's going to drive us, and which I know you have tons of, is just having empathy and compassion, right? Like you said, when you go there and you see what you've seen, you cannot do nothing, right? So I think that that being the driving force behind everything is so true. So thank you so much, Tajri. Please feel free to stay and join our panel. Feel free to hop on and also just share your thoughts. When we have our Q&A. And I hope you stay with us for the next part of our session. Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, now we're moving on to the next session. This one is with two really wonderful power couples that we're very, very honored to have with us here today. The first couple is Zalina Jamaluddin and Muhammad Shahril. And Zalina is actually the COO of Sea Hibiscus Sdn Bhd, and Shahril is the commercial manager at ExxonMobil Exploration and Production. They're going to share their story with us, some practical tips about how they've managed their very high profile careers and their 3 children during COVID. Their first one even entering Cambridge. How did they manage to thrive, right, during this difficult time? Zalina also made this 2-point career pivot, right? Not only changing industry, but also moving to a C-suite role, right? So very, very exciting I'm very excited to hear about how she's done that. And the second couple is Dr. Nik and Dr. Afiq. Dr. Nik is a psychiatrist trainee at a hospital in Selayang, and Dr. Afiq is commercial advisor for Shell Malaysia. So like we said, before this, when we had a little chat before this session, a lot of engineers in the room. Maybe the engineers are thriving better than the rest of us. They're going to share their journey as well as working parents. They had their first baby just a few months before the pandemic, right? And they had to juggle work from home, taking care of their 2-year-old daughter now. And, Dr. Nik also served as a frontliner during the pandemic, while completing her membership with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, right, in London. So very welcome to both of them. And I'd just like to kick it off by asking the couples, right? I know it's been tough for all of us, but how do you believe you've managed to survive it? What are some of the ways you've managed to thrive during the pandemic? And what are some of the key strategies you'd say that helped you to come to where you are now? Can we start maybe with Zalina?
Thanks, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. Thanks, Tanstri. I think that was a very inspiring speech. So maybe I'll share a little bit more on the ground. I think one of the things that we've also learned as personally as an individual and also as a family during this whole 2-year crisis, right? I think I would distill it into 2. One is really going back to basics, right? Your fundamentals are challenged, so you find ways to strengthen or also stress test the foundations, right? And then the second one is, how do you manage crisis management? Because as a family, we had death in the family, we had death at workplace. Unfortunately for me, I had to manage significant crisis offshore, and that includes quite a number of deaths as well. So those are things that I think as a start, we look at the basics and the crisis management. And so I'll share a little bit more on the basics. Basics, despite the sound of it, is actually very important. So what are those for us? Of course, I'm very blessed to have a very an equal partner here, Shahril. I think in terms of support, he's really helped me to support, and I'll let him chip in after this. But I think the routine as a family that we've established is very important, and how we work with our kids in terms of the family rituals. That's important, right? Actually, before the COVID, before the lockdown, we even had our kids and I used to have family meetings. So before like a week before the COVID, the first lockdown, we actually sat down and we brainstorm on what it's going to look like. Basically, it's crisis preparation, right? What's going to happen? How are we going to kind of structure our life? Our life is going to change. So that really that is helpful, right? And then communication, clarity of roles, who does what. And then of course, we know what our values are as a family and as individual, and we help prioritize the day-to-day and even as the crisis comes. So let me stop there first, because I want to let my partner also speaks about his experience, and then I'll go back a little bit on the crisis management, or maybe we get Afiq and Nik also to chip in on that.
Hi everyone, Shahril here, Zalina's spouse. I guess what I would like to add to that is, I can share one of the family crises that we went through is probably around, my father passed away in July of last year, right? And he passed away due to a brain tumor, right? It wasn't his first cancer, that's all I can say. But the cancer came back, getting treatment was quite, it was a bit late because a lot of the hospitals were full-handed taking care of COVID. And there was a period of time that really tested the family, right? Because I was practically in the ICU every day, probably for 60, 70 days straight, up to the point when he was released just to go to palliative care. So one lesson that I learned from that, at that point in time, I was in charge of the HSE, Health, Safety and Environment, for our operations in my company in Malaysia, all the upstream operations. And the key learning was to ask for help, right? I asked for help from my boss, who was an American at that point in time. I asked for help from my team, right? Sometimes you feel a bit scared or embarrassed to do that, because you are the boss, right? And you just have to show that you are vulnerable. And at this point in time, for the next couple of months, I really need to take a few hours off every day, right? My family needs me, my father needs me, that kind of stuff. And I think at the end of the day, it turned out very, very positive, right? I learned that when you show you're vulnerable, you become more authentic, right? Folks believe more of what you're saying versus you're trying to hide your stress, which actually stresses people out. Yeah. And through that experience, it helped me become sort of a better son, better husband, and better boss, even in the office.
Thank you so much, Shahril. And yeah, I think having that courage, right, to ask for help, and the humility to admit that you need it is so important. Maybe before we go back to Zalina to hear about crisis management, Afiq, Dr. Afiq, would you like to say something as well about how you've stayed resilient throughout it all?
I think let me probably build from how Zalina said the family had a meeting crisis. I think if we all, everyone here look back to when, you know, that 18th of March, 16th March, there you go. 16th of March 2020, the announcement came from the previous Prime Minister. I think a lot of us thought differently. Shell made the announcement to start working from home 2 days before country went into lockdown. The boss back then went like, okay, it's okay, we'll see you guys soon. And so when we started starting working from home, we didn't know how long it would take. My wife works in the hospital, so I straight away said, you know, you are out there, you're exposed, so let me fetch and send our daughter from the daycare, thinking that
the daycare would continue to open.
Yeah, so we didn't even know that the daycares would close down, and then I'll be with her the whole time. So this is, you know, you talk about planning and thinking ahead, but you really don't know what is ahead. So I think one of the things that really helped us is, indeed, I'll echo Shahril, vulnerability, you know, admitting that you actually don't have control over what's ahead. And then having those small things, because I remember there were days which was so hard for me. And I remember thinking, if I can make the bed, if I can wake up and make my bed, that's already one win. And then after that, I'll do something else, you know. And I have a 10-month-old baby next to me. My wife has gone off to work already, and okay, I'll make my bed first, and then after that, I'll think about, okay, maybe I'll then thaw the milk. you know, the small, very small steps. But by the end of the day, you feel like it's been 10 years already. But yeah, it was not easy, but those are the small steps. Have anything to add?
Oh, goodness. I cannot even imagine what you went through, because initially I was stressed over having to go to work regularly, especially at the height of the pandemic, when people didn't really know what was going on, how safe it was to go out. And the fact was I had to keep going to a hospital to work and being worried of what I would catch and bring home to my very young family. But echoing what Zalina and Shahril, I'm really sorry to hear about your father, by the way. Family really comes first. We really have to put family first. Even when Nuha got COVID, the thing that actually helped us make it through that very difficult situation was the fact that I was pretty much on video calls with family 24 hours a day. Both of us told our colleagues that we would not be able to work virtually at all. And our focus is entirely on just her well-being, and also on the rest of our family, some of whom also got COVID at that time. I don't know, it's just so difficult just thinking about that time again, right?
Just to take a few steps back, what happened was, so throughout the period, towards the end of 2020, December 2020, so this time last year, we found out my parents got COVID, and then we found out our daughter Nuha had got it, and it was really because I couldn't take it anymore, so I started sending her to my parents, and she got it when she was over at her parents. So a lot of guilt came from that, I have to admit, because she was supposed to be with me, but I needed to focus on work. There were some misalignments there, and I made the decision to put her somewhere else, which and we had to decide. Nuha was then 1 year old. Who amongst the two of us should follow her
because
to
we were both
Hospital?
Negative at that point.
We were both negative at that point, so very difficult decisions to make in the family. Reflecting back also makes us But maybe Michelle, we'll pass it back to you. Don't want to?
Oh yeah, thank you. No, I mean, I wanted to hear more, but thank you for passing it back. But when just listening to it is breaking my heart, right? And the fact that you admit that both of you were in that negative headspace, right? Probably just suffering just as much as the whole world with this. What's going to happen next, right? And it's we always say that when we get into when we get married and we're in a couple, or when we have a partner, you always hope that there's one person, one of you, right, will be the one to carry or pull or push the other up when the other one is down, right? But during this pandemic, we find that if all of us are down, then it just makes it that much more difficult. And of course, it's psychosomatic, because because your emotional and mental health counts so much in terms of your physical health as well. And even just getting up in the morning and making the bed, right, having that physical energy to do it. I know what you mean, right? Step by step, have that cup of coffee, right, one step at a time, and make it through the day until you go to bed at night and wake up the next morning hoping and keeping the hope alive, right, that things will change and get better. So yeah, so thank you so much, and Shahril for sharing about your dad. We're so sorry to hear about it. These are the real stories, that grip us, that tear at our hearts. And Zalina, can I just go back to you and ask, so tell us about these crisis management plans that you had in place, or that you managed to put in place.
Sure. I think that what I want to also underscore is that the importance of routine. And Michelle, you talk about psychosomatics and stuff. And I find that that knowledge is very useful for me when I had to handle this crisis. One thing is, I think what I've learned from Shahril and I's crisis, our family crisis, is the space, right? The space of compassion that you have to give to each other. And I think that's what we I think it was like a practice run for me, because when he's at the hospital every day and with the mom, I had to take care of the kids and also run the business literally, right? So, and I've kind of learned how to I feel like I have learned so much compassion from that, and just be very understanding and really exercise my empathy, right? Not knowing that this year I have to exercise my empathy on 500 people or more, whatever the number is, right? Which is a large number. So from that experience, what I've learned is that the typical crisis management still stands. You have the protocols, you know what to respond, what needs to be responded, what are the priorities, and everything is clockwork. But amidst all that clockwork of response is actually that space of compassion. I said that is so important, because every day we had this whole crisis for almost 3 months, right? So if you want to run a marathon, I am sure I can definitely empathize with Nik, because being a frontliner, right? I mean, I'm just talking about 3 months. All the doctors are probably talking about years and years of exposure. But even over these 3 months, I've learned how to take care of myself, just be compassionate to myself first, because I know that if I break, the whole team will break, right? And I've seen that. I've seen how the leaders, and we're talking about guys who are 40 years experience. And I remember that call at night. When the guys said, Zalina, I have worked for 40 years since whenever, and this is an unprecedented crisis, and I actually cry for my guys. I mean, that type of response that you get. So you have to have compassion for yourself to actually hold that space, and then have the compassion to the team that you work with, to have that strength to just run across that finishing line, because we don't know what that finishing line is going to look like. When the first week started, we don't know what the finishing line is going to look like. We don't know who's going to survive. And in my head, when I did the back calculation, it's like, okay, if this number of these people, chances are from the data, this many people will be infected. From this number, this many people will die. We know that. That's a fact, right? So from that anticipation of crisis protocol and management, there has to be that space of just taking care of yourself first, basically putting the oxygen mask first. And how I did it, going back to the psychosomatic thing, I actually exercise every night. Every night I pray to God for miracle. Seriously, miracle. I'm sure Afiq and Nik can understand me. Shariah and I, we pray for miracle every day, so that we can come out from this crisis unscathed. I mean, we will be scathed, but survive lah. At least we survive, right? And we can look back and say, okay, I've done my best. And I think the third one is actually having the trust. So I actually have to say, during the whole work, I think this year has been quite challenging for me, but I trusted my partner to do simple things like breakfast and laundry, and little things like that. But I trusted that the breakfast will be there every morning when I wake up, and I don't have to worry about that. And the same thing, he will trust me that I will help my kids with homework. I mean, sorry, but we can't sometimes moms are better with homework, but that's just how family works. Yeah, so I think that the lesson learned is not just the hard part, but also the soft part. You know, that vulnerability and the awareness that sometimes, actually not sometimes, every time when this thing hit, we need support, and we're not like all the Superman, Superwoman, and there's that place to ask for help. And I'm just grateful that I think despite all these lessons learned and the hardship, we do come out. And this morning I addressed to the team at the town hall. I said, I look back, I just feel so proud with how the team have come so far. Yeah. Okay, sorry, it's a little bit philosophical, but I just had to say what I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you, and I take my hat off to you for handling such a huge crisis at work. It must have been quite devastating, having deaths on board and all that. And but I'd like to go back to what you said as well about, just holding that space and having compassion for yourself. Whenever I speak about resilience and whenever I coach people about resilience, I always tell them to manage your four energies, right? Your physical energy, keeping that exercise up, like you said, eating well, sleeping well, getting enough rest, right? Even though, working from home has made it quite difficult. We've had Zoom fatigue and all that. The emotional, making sure that you're emotionally well and healthy, connecting with people, right? I think I've counseled so many couples over the last year plus on how to just be kinder to each other, right? Forgive each other more, don't hold things against each other because we're all in it together, right? The other one, of course, is just having that ability to restore yourself mentally when you drain, because it can be really draining. Just keep, pushing and pushing and pushing, not taking the time to rejuvenate. And of course, finally, that spiritual side of it, right? How do we find the faith and the hope and the purpose in it all? So COVID can't be for nothing. There must be meaning that we can find and take away from it, right? So that prayer for that miracle, I think your prayers are answered, right? We're not there yet, but we're getting there, and he's answered, us in so many other ways as well, right? So Shahril, can I just ask you a different question? So when Zalina says, making sure that there's breakfast at the table, laundry is done. So how do you feel about this shifting, gender roles in the family? The things that you normally think of as possibly what women. For me, right, in my household, my husband is the chef, so he cooks, right? So he makes the most delicious meals, right? I can cook, but I hate it, so I don't do it. So in our family, it's very fluid. We don't really have that kind of norm. So how's it with you all? Did you see a shift during this pandemic?
Again, a bit like Tan Sri Jemilah, my parents as well, didn't really raise us with a very strong gender stereotype. Right, my father was always the type who would, bring his dishes to the sink, and he would wash his own dishes. Right, so I grew up washing dishes and doing laundry and all that. What I can add to this discussion, though, is there are some things that I don't like to do. Right, either I'm not good at it. Zalina's laughing because she knows she can iron a shirt in 2 minutes. It might take me 15. And it still looks crumpled, right? which then I will become a grumpy spouse and father. So there are some things that we just outsource, right? Some things we outsource to a cleaner that comes by twice a week. During the peak of the pandemic, when our cleaner couldn't come, I bought a robot vacuum cleaner, right? So have the robot do vacuuming, so I don't have to bother with that, right? So I love that robot so much I even give it a name. There are some things that you just have to set up the systems to be in place and outsource some of that stuff. With respect to gender roles, I wouldn't answer that exact question, but I would say, for dual career couples, right? And you're talking about work-life balance, right? As individuals, we want to achieve work-life balance. As a family, we want to achieve work-life balance. When I was younger, probably, you know, a lot more ambitious and thinking I'm a lot more Superman than I am. If that work-life balance was like a seesaw, right? I spend a lot of energy trying to keep that seesaw at the center, right? That takes a lot of energy and focus, you know, to make sure that every day I have enough time for leisure and enough time for this, right? Or every, you know, month, every week, you know, that is just perfectly balanced. The reality is there will be times when work, you know, maybe for both of us or for one of us is going to be more time consuming. And then we have to just make sure that the other side of the seesaw doesn't go below the minimum threshold, right? And sometimes, you know, work is less, right? And sometimes one side of the seesaw is up for me but down for Zalina, or vice versa, and then that's when we cover for each other, right? But you know, don't put all your energy trying to keep that seesaw balance, because you'll get really tired, right? Sometimes you just have to let it rock, right? And just make sure that, you know, if one side hits the ground, it doesn't hit the ground too hard.
You dah ni ke? Huh? Your camera.
Oh. Thank you, Shahril. And you know, I absolutely right. So I know what you mean about keeping that seesaw. And you know, and my previous boss, right? He used to say it's not about work-life balance, right? He said, because what does that mean, right? It means that if you're at home, you're alive, and when you're at work, you're dead, right? So he said, you know, maybe that's not what we should call it, right? Because it should be then dead life balance, right? So instead of thinking about it as work-life balance, right, maybe we can think about it more as like an integration, right? So instead of finding that balance, because keeping that seesaw you know, accurately balanced is so much more difficult than just integrating it and finding a way to make, you know, work part of life, life part of work, but in a way that's healthy, right? So that, you know, because if we have that passion every day for the things that we do, and we have passion for the work that we perform, and we find purpose in the work that we have, then it doesn't become work anymore, right? It becomes a calling. It becomes something that we do because we love it and we want to do it, right? So of course, you know, we're not talking just about all the nitty-gritty day-to-day things, but even those, right, can mean something. You know, I'm always inspired when I hear that story about the this philosopher, right, who was walking down the road and he sees two bricklayers, and so one bricklayer is like sweating away, you know, when he's laying the brick, and the philosopher goes and asks him and says, "What are you doing, young man?" And he says, "Oh, I'm laying a brick." Right. And the philosopher was like, okay, but you know, he looks miserable, right? And the other bricklayer is whistling a happy tune and looking so happy, right? And the philosopher goes up to him and says, "What are you doing?" Right? And he says, "Are you laying a brick?" He asks him. He says, "No, I'm building a hospital," right? And when, you know, when you bring that kind of passion, when you reframe what you do, then work, you know, that work-life integration can happen so much more easily, right? And so much more fluidly than if work was not something that we were passionate or enjoy. Which takes me actually to Dr. Nik, because, you know, as a frontliner, you have to have that sustenance and resilience, you know, to love your job, right? In order to be able to get up and do it every day, and even to, you know, sometimes feel like you're putting your family in danger. Can you tell us a little bit more about, you know, how you find this work-life integration or balance?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Actually, I have to admit, I absolutely adore my job. I love my job. I love seeing patients. I love treating patients. I enjoy actually going to work. Despite everything that I mentioned earlier about the fear of infection and so on, I still go every day because I actually enjoy it. And we had this discussion when Shell mentioned that you all start working from home, that obviously I would continue going to work. And I actually felt quite bad that I was actually still going to something that I enjoy doing. And I still get to see my colleagues, even though it was in a socially distanced manner. At least I still got to see other people. Afiq, being stuck in our very small apartment, only had a toddler to speak to the whole time. And I cannot imagine it being easy for him at all. But I really take after what Shahril mentioned about the so-called work-life balance on the seesaw. I remember when I was trying to sit for my final exam, it was quite stressful because it was going to be the first virtual membership exam outside of the UK. And there was a lot of coordination involved, and there was a lot of studying involved. And as you can imagine, I wasn't able to take much leave as well because work was already tight as it was, with on and off staff calling in sick or getting infected with COVID. So we really could not afford to take much leave the way I used to for my previous exams. And I remember at that time feeling that like the so-called work-life balance seesaw tilted more towards the work and study side. But thankfully, Afiq was very, very patient, very understanding, and he kept reminding me to look at the end goal, which similar to your story about the 2 bricklayers, it really helped put things into perspective when I thought about why I was doing it, why I had to continue working and studying, because I think at some points I thought like I wasn't even going to sit for the exam. I thought it was just too difficult to juggle everything. But I guess this is where it really helps to have, first of all, a really good partner who understands and who knows your abilities and who believes in you, and also someone who was willing to do so much of the housework when obviously I wasn't able to pull through as much, not like a traditional wife would be expected to do, I suppose. Yeah. What do you think?
No, most definitely. But I think I just wanted to touch a bit on Michelle, I think when you say passion, right, and especially you want to find balance in work and life, you have passion for life, you definitely want it to have some volume. You don't have passion in work, you then try to scrutinize the number of hours you work in. One of the things that I find, maybe just to share the light side and the dark side, right? One of the things that I did not quite enjoy in this transitioning to working from home was there was a lot of trying to feel out in the workspace. How do we create a caring environment? But it wasn't done in an organic manner, to a point where I had to talk to the team twice a week, and we went round robin and everyone took turns to talk about what happened, what's happening work-wise and what's happening personal-wise. And it was a script. And it's like, from the work front, I'm doing XYZ, and in the personal front, I'm doing ABC. And it felt so inorganic and unnatural, and it took an annoyance. And I couldn't take much of it because I was already managing a little girl, and then I had to be on my own. But then on the other side, I'm willing to go the extra mile. I know that she loves her work. I know that she's working hard for the for specialization. I always kid. I said if it comes down to one of us needing to let go or stop working, I'll put my hand up, because she's the one who has more benefit to society by 10,000 times more than whatever it is I am doing at work. So it's a no-brainer for me. You need to study, please take the space. You need this space, and I know it's for the long run as well. Exam is till the end, till October. Fine, take your space till October, because this is the long haul, right? Yeah. And hopefully you front load these things, you front load the hardship, so hopefully you get some ease in the future. No man, no lotus. That's right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Afiq. So we had, I'd like to open the floor to, comments and questions now. We have about 10 minutes, but just let me share a few, that I'm seeing on my screen, right? Michelle and my King says, I hope when my children see me work and the impact and the passion I bring to work, they'll be inspired about the possibilities of building hospitals versus laying bricks. Antoine says, absolutely. I think he agrees with you about finding that validation in work. The suicide rates, the stats for suicide rates go up tremendously in the jobless category, right? So COVID also has that benefit of putting everything in the right perspective. And Amita's just validating all of us. Thank you so much, saying, how authentic and real the stories are. And I so agree. So I'd like to open it up to the floor now for any questions and answers that you may have for our wonderful panel. just, you can like before, you can just raise your hand and speak out or write it in the chat box. Thank you, Crystal, for saying that. She says this is one of the most inspiring virtual events she's attended in a while. So any questions for our panel? No? Okay. Oh, let's see. I just saw something come up in the chat. Okay, no, that's from Rosita. All right, so maybe I can have I have one for you. So Afiq and Shahril, how much do you feel, we've spoken about this before, and Tan Sri Jemilah said it as well, right? We need that support system. Women need that support system around them, and we've spoken about it a little bit, but how much a role do you think you've played in supporting the women, your spouse, right, in getting ahead? I know, Afiq, you've been looking after the baby at home and all that, but if you were to consider it, right, do you feel that you've played quite a significant role? And then I want to ask the women this question, and then see what your take is on it as well. Who'd like to go? Shahril, go ahead.
Yes. So, Zalina and I have known each other since our teens, right? And we treat each other as equals. And I think that is the basis of how we operate together, right? We got married quite young, right? We married right after graduation.
So the story is coming out.
Yeah, so it's we've been friends a long time, and we just have this mutual respect for each other. There are periods when Zalina has a more busy job, then I'm fine with a slightly less busy job, and vice versa, right? So it's difficult to answer that question because it's not really an issue for us. So the key, I think, is mutual respect and giving space while giving the support.
Thank you. So I guess it's, give and take on both sides, right? That constant support structure and system, right? So just as much as you give to her, she gives back to you as well. Zalina, what would you like to respond to that? Or how would you like to respond to that?
So it's quite interesting because for me, the story is I never wanted to get married, right? Like I never. And then when I and it's like, if I get married, then somebody's going to clip my wings. And that was that old belief, right? And I made that a condition. And I said to Shahril, and I said, if you can tolerate me and I can tolerate you, I think we're just going to grow together. And I think it's just that simple premise. And I think from there, we kind of work as an enterprise. Luckily, we are both engineers. So we kind of just set the system, set the processes, SOPs, and KPIs. And we run our family like a company, which some of you know us very well. We have family meetings, we have annual business plans, we've got check-ins, we have ratings, we have performance management. So I think we get the best of both worlds. And I think, again, with all this so-called hardline stuff, there is that soft part, right? And when I say soft, it's not like soft or anything, it's just human. It's a human way of respecting and treating each other well. I think that premise with whether it's gender diversity in general, treating the other person as a human, and this person deserves your respect, and you will get that back.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're running, the family almost like a company in a way. So in that case, can I say that you're both CEOs because of the equality? And how about you, Afiq? How do you feel about the role you've played in Dr. Nik's life?
So I found it very funny when Zalina said she didn't want to get married because
don't.
so I proposed to her. She said not yet. She said she wants to, do a few years of working and all this, and I said okay. And I came back a few more years later, and I asked again, and finally she said yes. I think she is very driven, as is, and the space we need to create that space. But then space is void, and void means sometimes when you create space, you're thinking that you are creating space and therefore you are already accommodating, but actually space is void, and void also means that sometimes you don't connect. And what I mean by that is it's not just space alone, it has to be purposeful space lah, kan? So it means that you tell or you communicate to your partner that, okay, I am doing this for you. I'm giving you space so that you can study or go to work and come back, and not just let go. So I think that is very important, because it's not always smooth sailing. There were times when we realized that, hey, actually we haven't checked in, or we haven't spoken to each other for a while, and we have to then deliberately find space for that. And sometimes if you don't create the time to do that, then you could drift apart as well, and that's also a risk. So to cut the answer short, I think I try to play the supportive role. I try to do most of the house chores, and Nuha is, I mandikan, hantar sekolah, pick her up, and make sure that she's ready for everything. She puts her to sleep, I wake her up. I think that you try as much as you can play that role.
Thank you. And Dr. Nik, any thoughts on what he said?
I do not remember you proposing to me the first time. However, we were good friends for a good 9 years before we got married. So I do understand where Zalina and Shahril came from, and I appreciate that your relationship started off with a good, strong foundation in friendship first, because I feel that that's very important. Because I have to admit, up to a certain point, I knew that I would only marry him because I'm so comfortable with Afiq. We've known each other for so long. I felt that he understood me, and as with all of my quirks, all of my negativities, all of my bad behavior, he understands everything. So I felt that I would never find someone else who is as understanding or as patient with me. And I felt that, especially in the past 1.5 years, it's been very difficult, especially when I was so focused on my exams. I think there were some points in time that things got quite tense at home. And we actually had to sit down a few times to really talk about what we were doing, what our roles would be in the household, understanding that we're not in the same sort of traditional families that we grew up in. Both our mothers were housewives, so they were completely focused on family life, So I think we really had to talk about our roles and what we were willing to sacrifice. So like he said, he puts her to sleep. I have to wake up a bit earlier to find time to study, so that by the time I get home from work, I am not doing any studying or any exam related things. So it meant waking up at 4 a.m. for a few months prior to my exam, so that I could study, pump milk, and get ready for work. But Afiq thankfully gave me space for that. So I have to say he's been very supportive.
So congratulations to both couples. You obviously took Tan Sri Jamilah's advice to heart from many years ago and married well. Absolutely. So I think we'll have one last question here, and then we'll move on to our next part of our session. This is from Sarah Abu Bakar. She said, how do you find that balance and structure when there's barely a boundary of working from home, family commitments, house chores, acknowledging that both partners are already equally supporting each other?
Maybe let me try that. So I think it's a mix of discipline, right? Creating I'm a believer in defining what must happen and what we can let go. So it doesn't have to be perfect, right? But there are things that you must do. And the things that you must do, let's say, for example, taking care of health. okay, laundry, if it doesn't get done today, tomorrow is fine, right? I mean, nobody's going to die from it. I think for us as a family, having that daily communication with the family and listening to each other's day is super important. And we will carve up from that I'll cover our time. Shahril has his own set of routine. So the good thing about us is that we, as a family, as a I would say as a unit, we have our set of family rituals and what we must do, and we are okay, you know, if the dish is not washed, be it. If I don't cook or if he doesn't cook, we'll just grab. I mean, those little things add up. So we are okay, we have defined that. But also the good thing also is we are both kind of okay to give each other space. Like I have my own me time. And just because I needed that. There are times when it gets so intense at work, I needed some time off. I just do. And I will then switch off everything. 10 minutes doing my yoga on my own in our own gym, and that's it, right? Like no one talks to me. No one talks to me. And they don't get offended because they knew mommy needs to take this. And the same thing with the kids, you know, so, and also Shariah, he has his own probably sitting on the rock kind of moment there. So I think balancing and having that discipline to just say, okay, these are the boundaries, but at the same time be flexible.
Panas dengan biasa.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Zalina. You know, absolutely right. Putting boundaries down. I know it's been so tough. So the last year as well, you know, coaching a lot of people on, you know, when you're at work, when you're working in an office, right? You can actually sometimes just drive home, decompress on the way home, you know, leave work behind, get home, step in the house and say, all right, I'm home now, right? Work is done for the day. But unfortunately, right, when you know, remote working and working from home, home is work, work is home. There's no space, right? Unless you demarcate a part of the house for work to say that, okay, this is my office, this is my home. So there's none, right? So there's all this blending. So people are still on their laptops. They don't close it and leave it in your bags anymore. There's no time to decompress on that drive home. It's just there all the time. It's open. The phone is constantly, you know, WhatsApp pinging. You checking your emails at dinner time. You checking your emails on weekends. You want to take leave, but you know that it's remote, so you still have meetings to attend to, right? So if you don't have the discipline to draw your own boundaries, like you say, then who's going to draw it for you, right? Nobody's going to say to you, stop working, it's 8 o'clock now, right? Sit down for dinner with your family, right? So you have to have that own discipline to be able to do it and say, look, I'm taking this time out. It's really important for my emotional and mental health. This compassion for myself, which you talk about. I so agree with that, right? And for me, it was also a lesson because sometimes I'm a workaholic and I need to know how to switch off. And like you said, right, you need to let go as well, right? So when there's no place to be a perfectionist and say, you know, I say to yourself, right, we need to get all the dishes washed tonight, we need to get all the laundry done. You know, it's not going to kill you. You can always do it tomorrow, right? So being able to let go and to take care of yourself first is also important. I think I just want to address this last thing as well by May, when she says, when you have compassion exhaustion, right? What happens then, right? And I think it's going back, you know, to what you said as well, Zalina. You can have compassion for all the people around you, but you need to have that compassion for yourself. If not, you'll have compassion exhaustion because you keep giving and giving and giving. And women, if you look at the stats all around the world, they always tend to be the ones to give more than men, right? So they're always the ones, when even the women will admit it when they're filling out, you know, all the research case studies and papers. They'll always say that, you know, I always give more than I receive, right? So we're natural givers, natural nurturers. The problem is that we nurture and give so much that sometimes we forget to give to ourselves. So our glass becomes empty because we keep filling up everybody else's glass around us. So compassion for ourselves is so key. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to this beautiful panel that we have here. I'm sure, you know, everyone who's been listening to you has been as touched as I have. You know, the stories have been so true, so real, so heartwarming, and I know you know, it's not easy to share. You shared difficult things with us, things that you probably, you know, have not said out loud before, but thank you for saying it out loud tonight. We appreciate it so much, and I'm very sure that you've inspired so many others out there to keep on pushing through. And do stay on, you know, to the end. And we're just going to move to our next part now. The audience, you know, just we'd like to give you a little clap, and also Tasri Jemilah for the wonderful sharing that you've had. And now I'd like to actually invite Sean Ferguson, who is Dr. Sean Ferguson is our Senior Associate Dean. We're very happy to have him join us this evening. He's actually going to talk to us about the ASB 30% Fellowship and Discount Award that we'd like to tell you a little bit more about, right? So Sean, can we ask you to come join us?
Thank you, Michelle. Really appreciate everyone's for their participation today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Tantri's Jemilah for her remarks, super inspiring. I think the quote that I love most is if you don't marry well, don't marry at all. And I think it goes along with something that Warren Buffett said, that, you know, the most important decision you can make in life is who you pick as a life partner. And Zalina and Shahril and Afiq and Muyasarrah, you know, I think are great examples of, you know, selecting right. And I think you can find that balance if you have the right partner. So we thank you all. Also want to give a special shout out to Zalina for orchestrating this partnership before she left at ASB. And so, you know, this is a great initiative because we value, creating a gender equal environment here at the Asia School of Business and striving for that. And we think as a business school, it's critical to make this a priority. Also want to thank Tantri Jemilah for her work on leading our ILIA Awards Committee for our LISA conference. And so thanks everyone for your participation. Also just wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of our relationship here with the 30% Club. And one of the things, you know, they say talk is kind of cheap. And a lot of times what you have to do when you're committed to something is put, you know, a symbol of your commitment. And what we've done in partnership with the 30% Club is come up with multiple scholarships and discounts for our various programs. And so what we have for our full-time MBA program is one fellowship for 100% of the program fees. And then for our working professional program, for people who want to work and continue to go part-time, while pursuing their MBA, we have 4 discounts of 25% tuition. In order to apply and be eligible for these awards, applicants must submit to the program of their choice by the deadline. There will be 1 essay question, and selected candidates will be invited to interview typically 6 weeks after the deadline. And so the applications have already opened. They were open since August, and the deadline is quickly approaching for the full-time MBA program, January 25th, 2022. And for our working professional program, it's March 15th, 2022. So we hope there's an opportunity for those who are interested to consider our program. We think it's a transformational experience that, you know, is unmatched in the market. So just to give people, just in case you don't know who ASB is, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on us as a school. And, you know, ASB is a product for a need for world-class talent in Malaysia, the region, and the emerging world. And we're a product of 2 really highly regarded and well-esteemed institutions, Bank Negara Malaysia and MIT Sloan School of Management. The 2 organizations have a history of excellence and rigor. Bank Negara's commitment to this initiative financially and through operational guidance is unparalleled. And what we hope is that ASB can serve as a talent magnet and a multiplier for the Malaysia, the region, and beyond. We have 2 types of programs. And so for those of you all who weren't familiar with the programs, they're designed for 2 types of individuals, career changers and career accelerators. And so career changers are individuals who want to do a total shift of gears and transition from their career path. They're looking to change multiple dimensions, be it industry, function, or geography, and they're looking to do a wholesale change. Now, on the other hand, career accelerators for our working professionals program, they're seeking to enhance their career and explore areas that are synergistic with their existing career track. Generally speaking, these individuals are happy with their industry or function. They already have a strong network within their company, and they have the time and flexibility to pursue an MBA because of the nature of their work. And so, regardless of the program and what you're looking for, ASB provides a world-class educational experience that really can have a transformational impact on an individual's career. When we think about the type of profile that we're looking for as frontier-minded and impact-oriented individuals who want to build a globally oriented career. And there are 4 pillars of our value proposition, that MIT Sloan DNA, that's really relevant by doing an MBA in this Asian context. Our action learning curriculum positions you and trains you on how to solve problems and make impact in multiple settings, which leads to this kind of transformation from a career perspective that leads to strong career outcomes. And as you can see, we have market-leading scholarships and discounts and financial aid for our programs that really make the ROI and the return on investment for ASB, the value proposition is without peer. The program is, built to create these generalists that are becoming more and more high demand in Asia. What we're seeing in today's business environment is that the generalist is rising, right? Because there's too much uncertainty out there. While companies do hire disciplined skills in the early stage, the people who move up in organizations eventually rely on these generalist and transferable skills that can be deployed in multiple settings. In our program here, we're really built around creating, an environment that doesn't allow you to be ideologically reliant on a single perspective. People who can do multiple things, which we try to train you at here at ASB, allows companies to deploy you in a way that, allows you to make the most impact over the course of a career. And so the long and short of the story for us and our bet that we're making on the region is that there aren't enough generalists, and ASB is going to be the provider of these kind of world-class generalists. So these are exciting times at ASB. We've just moved into our new building. It's a purpose-built campus for the future. In the spirit of Star Wars references from Tanshri Jemilah, this is like the positive Death Star here, and we have an amazing state-of-the-art residential campus. And what I want to do is share with you all just a video of our campus so that you can kind of see what it's all about here. So. Whoops. Sorry. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. If any of you have any questions about the program, the scholarship, and the discounts, please feel free to connect with me and reach out to me on LinkedIn. I also have my colleague here, Fazila. You can also connect with her as well. And we really appreciate everyone coming out and being a part of this conversation. Again, thanks again to our panelists and our speakers. This has been a wonderful night, and we hope to see you at our next and upcoming events. And I think with that, that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Sean. Wonderful for you that you've had managed to share with us what you call our positive Death Star. Love the video of the campus. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so do connect with us on LinkedIn, reach out and holler at Sean or Fazila. There's a few links in the chat box as well on how you can find out more about the scholarships and the programs. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Before we go, I'd just like to leave you with my favorite quote, and that is, now that my barn has burned down, I can see the moon. And, I just so believe that, COVID has been like a barn sometimes, right, for us. There's so many things in our lives, that we did not see, right, that needed fixing, that we did not see. But when it came along, it exposed a lot of things, and it's like ripping the bandage of the wound, right? Like Tan Sri Jemilah said, and now we can see the moon, right? We know that there's a better future out there for us, and we can create it all together. So I know I'm looking forward to co-creating this really beautiful reimagined future for us going forward. So thank you so much to our panelists, our speakers, and for all the people who put this together, Kritika, Fazila, Crystal, Nadia, of course, and all the 30% Club and everybody else in ASB who's been a huge contribution to this, Hamid and all. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.